Citizens of Paducah, I have come among you not as your enemy, but as your friend and fellow citizen, not to injure or annoy you, but to respect the rights and to defend and enforce the rights of all loyal citizens.
Grant issues a proclamation to try to quell civilian fear, and Abraham Lincoln takes note. Lincoln right away saw that proclamation and recognized, here's a man who understands people and is plain spoken, just like me.
Grant successfully occupied Paducah, Kentucky, without a shot being fired. And so he gets orders to attack a Confederate supply link on the Mississippi River at the small village of Belmont. Belmont is very important. It's Grant's first real test of combat in the Civil War.
My dear Julia, what you are to look out for, I cannot tell you. Your husband will never disgrace you, nor leave a defeated field. Captain, flush these rebels out now. Go on.
Yes, sir.
The Confederates abandoned their camp, and these Union forces, these are guys who just fought their first battle, very light casualties, and so they are euphoric at this point.
Grant has won, seemingly, a significant victory here, but his troops lose all discipline. Hey, boys, look what I found.
Captain! Yeah! Patrol your men! Yes, sir!
Now I can hit them Yankees.
The All-Stars of the Swamp return, and they're ready.
Looks like Civil War era. Could be brewing once more again if we as a civilized society do not look deeper into all this in understanding how that our adversary overseas would love for us to go to fighting and killing one another, in which we're already doing that now, pertaining to the bloodshed on the streets. But I'm talking about an all-out and out battle. That way, our enemy overseas can just walk over here and take us over. You know, it's one thing to have an ego about the South. It's one thing to have an ego about the Union forces in the North. But it's another thing to be Americans. Americans. The election's over. And in one way, I know this is going to sound naive, but in one way, it doesn't matter whether or not the Republicans win and the Democrats has to support them, or the Democrats win and the Republicans have to support them. We're all Americans, and we're all supposed to be working together. That's the part that we have failed in recognizing in this year's 2020 election that has been disruptive from A to Z because of this 2020 presidential election. As we get further into understanding this episode that it's talking about, let's understand that cultures, societies have began skirmishes simply because of people not understanding or people not willing to compromise in understanding what the basic needs are. And when we walk away from our compass, which is God Almighty, then is whenever we stand a chance on repeating history again. So please, let's listen to this.
Captain, control your men. Yes, sir. At Grant's first engagement at Belmont, the Confederates counterattacked. Into the trees! We cut our way in, we cut our way out! Keep your head down! He organized a fighting retreat north to the riverboats that were going to give them their means of escape. Grant was the last man to get on board ship. The boat had already untied and was starting to drift out into the river, and Grant actually rode his horse across the gangplank onto the riverboat. It was an amazing feat of horsemanship. Then Grant, in his typical self-deprecating style, he gave all the credit to the horse. He made some serious mistakes. He lost control of his men, but he is learning. And coming out of the Battle of Belmont, he's looking for the next fight.
In the early years of the war, there are really two distinct theaters. You have the Eastern Theater, where a series of different Union commanders prove incapable of really putting the pressure on the South that President Lincoln wants to see. And then you have the Western Theater, which is where Grant is.
In that Western theater, the Union strategy is going to be to occupy key transportation facilities in the West, open up the entire Mississippi if they can. And it was rather simple to look on a map where the Confederate strong points were and see where the dominoes might fall. Grant could plainly see that the most obvious ones, the northernmost ones, were clearly Forts Henry and Donelson. They commanded key rivers, and he could use those key rivers to advance directly into the Confederacy.
Fort Henry and Fort Donelson. I know Fort Donelson is in Tennessee. I believe Fort Henry is right on the Kentucky-Tennessee state line.
Grant wants to get this war moving. He doesn't believe sitting in garrison is going to win anything. So he makes a proposal to his commander, General Henry Halleck.
General Halleck, it's an honor.
State briefly the nature of your business.
My division is stationed here in Carroll on the Cumberland River, where we've been sizing up a naval assault on two enemy forts, Fort Henry and Fort Donelson.
Continue.
Fort Henry is badly sighted and vulnerable from the water. Fort Donelson is stronger, but commanded by General John Floyd, and he's no soldier. I believe if I can take both forts, we can advance as far as Nashville and Alabama.
A combined naval assault.
The victories would be yours, sir.
Thank you. But when I wish to consult you on the subject, I will notify you.
Very arrogant and rude.
They call Halleck old brains. They don't call him that for nothing. He wants everything done absolutely by the book, and Grant is not a by the book kind of guy. No limelight, no fanfare, and forget the pomp and circumstance. We're just going to get it done. And so the two clash. Grant, with this bulldog mentality, immediately turns to what I call his naval soulmate, Andrew H. Foote, the naval commander of the Western Flotilla with ironclad gunboats.
So the two of them jointly made a proposal to General Halleck to move against Fort Henry.
They're begging Halleck, prodding Halleck, please turn us loose, let us go. And it's only by the slimmest margins that Halleck allows Grant to attack.
It's very different to be in charge. Command is an extraordinary privilege, and the weight of responsibility is very much on your shoulders. And Grant experiences this as he approaches Fort Henry.
So February the 6th, Foote's gunboats begin to shell Fort Henry.
The infantry is going to get behind each fort, seal in the Confederate defenders, while the Navy just pummels Fort Henry into submission.
Most of the Confederates had already evacuated Fort Henry, surrenders, before Grant's men even get close to the fort. The capture of Fort Henry was significant, but Grant is not going to sit and rest on his laurels. Fort Donelson was only about 12 miles to the east. He keeps the ball moving.
Grant's thinking, all I'll have to do is say boo, and they'll surrender. And it doesn't really happen that way.
Fort Donelson was in a much better position, much better engineered than Fort Henry. An artillery duel began between the fort and his gunboats. And in short, the fort won.
The Confederates came out of the fort to counterattack. And the first thing Grant does is not panic. That's a pattern with Grant. No matter what happens, no matter how bad it gets, Grant doesn't panic.
In the midst of the battle, which is truly chaotic, Grant keeps his wits about him. He actually thinks. He can take inputs. He can change his mind.
At Fort Donelson, Grant will figure out these Confederates are moving with their knapsacks. They're not intending on going back. They're getting out of here.
Bring me that prisoner. Show me his bag. This looks like 2 days' rations. No. 3.
Looks like they're settling in to hold their position.
Looks like that, but it's a retreat. 3 days of rations is just enough to get to Nashville.
Sir, should reinforce the right. Wait till nightfall.
If we wait, they'll have time to escape. We gotta attack now and we can take this victory. Hold your lines.
Sir.
Hold your line! Hold your line! Prepare to advance!
Welcome to the fort. All these guys.
It had become a bloody battle to the point that Grant was winning. Once more, these are men's lives and women's lives and families' lives that have got torn apart during this type of brawl that probably all in all probably began as a brawl but wound up becoming an all-out and out assault. an assault upon each other that torn families and neighborhoods, towns, villages, and even cities apart. It was one of the saddest moments that America ever had to endure upon was, in fact, the Civil War. Let us go into this a little deeper to see just exactly what type of maneuvering Grant's going to do in understanding his opponent is not moving easily. Destruction has fallen upon the port.
They want an armistice and terms for surrender. We've broken their defenses, surrounded the fort, and outnumbered them almost 2-1. It's checkmate.
Who signed the note?
General Buckner.
Oh. Buckner. I know him from West Point. Paid off one of my debts back in New York. Saved me, really. Helped me get back to my family.
Then what are your terms?
Immediate and unconditional surrender. Or we fire in their works.
At Fort Donelson, Grant had organized a counterattack. The Confederates withdrew back into the fort, and they're trapped.
When Grant got the message, hey, I want to talk about surrender, the Confederate command situation at Fort Donelson had been an absolute comedy of errors. There had been 3 general officers inside Fort Donelson: John Floyd, Gideon Pillow, and Grant's old friend, Simon Bolivar Buckner. But when the idea comes to surrender, Floyd says, there is nobody in the Confederacy that they want worse than me. And so he says, I'm not surrendering. And he'll get out of Dodge. The second in command is Gideon Pillow. He thinks he's the greatest military commander ever. And Pillow says, they want me as well, so I'm not surrendering. So he gets out as well, turning the command over to the third in command, Simon Buckner.
Surrender was the proper thing. I rode to Buckner's headquarters.
This is over by Dover, Tennessee.
General Buckner.
You would not have taken the fort so easily if I'd been in command.
You're right. I would have done it differently. I assume Floyd and Pillow got away.
Last night. Yellow bastards. Pillow feared you'd want him a prisoner.
In my humblest opinion, he's more valuable to me as a Southern general.
Well, here we are, old friend.
Here we are.
About the terms you sent.
No terms. Immediate and unconditional surrender. Old friend.
victory for the United States occurred at Fort Donelson in February of 1862, courtesy of Ulysses S. Grant, U.S. Grant. Useless Grant became unconditional surrender of Grant. And that thrilled the northern population. It was big news because nothing good had been happening for the Union in the war.
In the Eastern Theater of the war, Lincoln is dealing with one whining, procrastinating general after another. But here's this Ulysses S. Grant out west who's winning battle after battle, and Lincoln is thrilled. He rushes to sign the order promoting Grant to Major General.
The first significant Northern victory of the Civil War will launch Grant to national prominence. During the aftermath of Battle Fort Donelson, a war correspondent painted a picture of Grant mounted on horseback, and in his mouth is the stub of a cigar. As this was the first great Northern victory of the Civil War, fans, admirers sent him 5,000 cigars. And so he started smoking these things. And Grant would smoke upwards of 20 of these a day.
For Grant, the first year goes good. If there's a rookie of the year for the Union side, it's Ulysses S. Grant. Nobody's winning the victories like he is.
He realized again that he had a gift for this. He was very, very good at battlefield command, and then beyond that, at battlefield strategy and tactics.
Grant has captured the first of 3 armies that he will capture over the course of the war. And he has now opened the Cumberland River so Union naval forces and land forces can make their way south deep into the Confederacy.
Dear Julia, soon I hope to move from here. And when I do, there will probably be the greatest battle fought of the war.
Shiloh.
I have no doubt of the result.
You can go to Shiloh Park to this day, and you can feel the remorse of the bloodshed that occurred during that great battle. They've got great monuments set up in regard towards some of their failures and successes. But the fact of the matter is, it was still a battle. It was still a skirmish. And men lost their lives simply because they was not willing to meet in the middle. They was not willing to compromise on certain issues, and because of it, bloodshed was abroad. A matter of fact, there's a place there in Shiloh, just north of Pickwick, that they claim in a big hard rain, there's a pond that even to this day still has a tendency of showing red tendencies in the water, that they claim the battle was so intense that part of that pond filled up full of nothing but blood. You know, it's the blood that curls and it screams out as it's hitting the earth, pertaining to the blood of Christ as he was hanging on the cross. It was the very blood
this year
that was crying out to humanity, why are you doing this to me? Pertaining to the Savior dying for man's sins. It was the blood that brought great remorse as Jesus was dying, just about the time that he took his last breath, of whenever the rent was ripped from head to toe, from top to bottom. And they claimed that during that time, the rock shook. There was a great earthquake. And even one of the Roman soldiers fell down onto his knees at the foot of the cross and said, "Surely this is and was the Son of God." It's the blood that makes all the difference in the world whenever it comes to the innocence of one who's crying out towards being vindicated. As you listen to more of this, you will understand that these type of battles took on a whole new meaning in the Civil War pertaining to the sacrifices that was being made simply because of a disagreement.
Little girl is lost, friend.
Simply because of people being hard-headed and not wanting to compromise pertaining to how they felt and what they believed.
The enemy was in force at Corinth, the junction of the two most important railroads in the Mississippi Valley. If we obtained possession of Corinth, the enemy would have no railroad for the transportation of armies or supplies.
Grant is thinking, how do I stay 2 steps ahead? How do I retain the initiative? How do I keep the enemy reacting to me? The war in the East is going badly, so everything is under a microscope. But in the West, with the first big victories at Forts Henry and Donelson, now all of a sudden the Tennessee and Cumberland rivers are open to invade the South, and this is what Grant seizes upon.
Knowing that the enemy was fortifying Corinth and collecting an army there, I at once put all the troops in motion for Pittsburgh Landing.
Pittsburgh Landing is a staging area to attack at Corinth. General Halleck warns Grant, don't bring on an engagement, don't start anything, don't pick a fight until everything is ready.
The Army had arrived with one of Grant's corps commanders, William Tecumseh Sherman. Sherman was a friend of Grant's at West Point, but they had not worked together before, and many of Grant's men were absolutely green. Some had just received their weapons a few days earlier. So Grant's intention is to get his men some training and wait there for another Union army under the command of Don Carlos Buell to get there, and then set out to Corinth.
So the idea of fighting a battle never enters Grant's mind at Pittsburgh Landing. And the scene is set for what would become this bloodbath of Shiloh.
Sir, do you want the new men digging entrenchments?
Don't intend to be here long enough. The men are raw. They need practice with guns, not with shovels. Sherman.
Sam.
Activity?
The Rebs stick their noses out and we keep slapping them. Whipped him in a skirmish yesterday.
And General Buell's men?
They're 3 days out.
We'll move on Corinth when it gets here.
If we got on here, yeah, the whole way down.
To General Halleck, the temper of the rebel troops is such that there is little doubt that Corinth will fall much more easily than Fort Donelson did.
Grant's major fault early in the war is this overconfidence. He thinks if anything happens, I'm going to start it, and it comes back to bite him.
Their commander at Corinth, General Albert Sidney Johnston, has been doing nothing but retreat. If he cannot regain the initiative and defeat Grant, it likely will mean the Confederacy will lose the Mississippi River. Johnston really believes that the war itself may be at stake. So Johnston decides to organize a counterattack against Grant.
Johnston knows that Grant's army is tucked up into Pittsburgh Landing. which is a cul-de-sac along the Tennessee River in between two major creeks. It seems like the good place to camp the Army. There's good springs here, there are creeks we can get water, it's good level camping ground. But the Confederate plan is to trap the Union Army in this cul-de-sac and to destroy the Union Army with one massive attack. And so Johnston gathers. He says, we must roll the iron dice of battle. We must conquer or perish.
The iron dice. The Iron Curtain is now moving, advancing from the south, going to attack Grant's force.
Grant's camp at Pittsburgh Landing was right near a small wooden church. It's one of the only landmarks in the entire vicinity. It was called Shiloh Church. Shiloh is translated as place of peace.
Translated from the word shalom. April 6, 1862, 6 o'clock a.m., early in the morning. And the battle begins. The flank from the south now is aggressive into enemy territory. Picking them off like flies. One right after another.
Report. Skirmishes, sir. That's all. These are not damn skirmishes. My God, bearer, attack, form a line and hold it.
Grant is not at Shiloh. Grant is actually having breakfast 9 miles north in his quarters at the Cherry Mansion.
Gentlemen, the ball's in motion.
Once more, it was one of the most bloodiest confrontations that the Civil War had seen at that particular time. Our enemy, our adversary, is not each other. Our enemy comes from opposing forces overseas that is out to kill, steal, and destroy. It is a possibility that this coronavirus that we're now all experiencing, either directly or indirectly, towards hearing about people dying, could have been opened up and sent to try to devastate various people in regard to this type of aggression. We don't know for sure if it was man-made. They're still wanting to track its origin over into a wet market in China pertaining to bats, people eating raw fish, squid, and other types of illegitimate critters. But I've heard just the opposite from various scientists that said that this particular origin, this particular strand, come out of a lab. You know, I don't know what tomorrow holds. None of us do. We would like to think that we know. We would like to believe that we know. But in reality, we really don't know what tomorrow holds, not only for the masses, but also just independently for ourselves. And to think that we are not under some sort of a siege ever since 9/11 would be very arrogant on our behalf in thinking that we're not in some sort of a siege, because we are. The Bible is very clear towards stating the fact that our adversary, which is out to kill, steal, and destroy, is in fact the author of confusion. And as long as he can keep us confused and memorized and fighting against each other, that's exactly what our enemy has plans of doing. It is really sad whenever people cannot get along of their own culture, of their own breed, of their own kind. It tears the country apart, not just socially, not just economically, but literally tears the country apart. We right now, as American citizens, know that we have an enemy. By going through various wars, we know that our adversary would like to take us over to the point that we become submissive to their will and submissive to their way. What we must not do is engage in repeating these type of eras pertaining to us fighting against one another, because whenever we do, we will weaken our strengths to the point that our true adversary will just walk over and take us over. So please, as you're listening to this, understand the sacrifices that was made just for us to have what we have today here in the USA.
Let's get these boys moving.
The Battle of Shiloh, April 6, 1862. It's down below me where I live presently, give or take, about a 2-hour drive. Down below Crump, down below where Buford Pulser, Walking Tall come from. Down below Savannah, Tennessee, on the Tennessee River. I don't think Shiloh is actually on the Tennessee River, but it's down in that territory. Pretty close to Crump, Mississippi, the state of Mississippi. Give or take about 20 miles just north, maybe not even 20 miles north of the Mississippi-Tennessee state line.
Form them into regiments. I don't care what regiments they used to be in. Make new ones.
So,
Come on, boys, form up! Form up!
Bill won't get here till nightfall. Wallace is still 6 miles north.
Order Wallace to come here at once with his men. Sherman?
Yeah, yes.
On the first day of the Battle of Shiloh, about 40,000 Confederate soldiers surprise the Union Army and begin pushing forward. It is the largest attack in American history up to that time. When Grant finally got to Pittsburgh Landing, officers didn't know where their men were, their men didn't know where the units were.
Grant immediately begins to assess the situation. It is almost as if battle clarified his mind, and he could see the central thing he needed to do: to remain calm, to collect soldiers who have straggled back into the area, and begin to plug this defensive line.
Very bad, Private.
It's only a scratch, sir.
So you can fight. Come on now, boys. Pitch in. I'm right behind you.
Grant makes his way around the battlefield, not caught up in the chaos, thinking, where are my commanders? What's their assessment of the fight and how it's going, and what can I do to assist them?
If Pittsburgh Landing falls, Grant knows his army is gone.
If the Confederate plan is to trap the Union Army in this cul-de-sac along the Tennessee River, then Grant will utilize this trap perfectly to fight a delaying action to hold out until Don Carlos Buell's reinforcements arrive. He has a whole division under Lew Wallace much nearer, and as he goes around and he talks to the different division commanders throughout the day, he will tell them, hey, Lew Wallace is on the way, should be here any moment now.
there's confusion and incoherence on the battlefield. But Grant had enormous control of his emotions. There was physical courage, this quiet competence, and he was a great horseman in a day and age when that was a very important skill to have on the battlefield.
A number of attempts were made by the enemy to turn our right flank where Sherman was posted.
General Sherman, situation? General, the boys bent, but they didn't break. I need reinforcements now. Where's Buell?
No Buell. I'm sent for Wallace. Can you hold your position?
Yes, sir. But it'll cost.
At the Battle of Shiloh, Sherman and Grant, while they had never been what you would call good friends, they will first come into their own as this wonderful duo who will turn out to be one of the great working partnerships of the war. While so many other fragments of that Union Army dissolve in panicked retreat, Sherman slows the Confederate onslaught.
Nevertheless, Grant knew that he may need that division of Lew Wallace's to just survive this fight. But there's great confusion with Wallace's division on how they should get to the battlefield, and Wallace does not show up. As the Confederates moved forward, the fighting became more and more constricted. It becomes a very chaotic, brutal fight, and Grant recognizes that at points of chaos, when everything is going wrong, you just simply have to do something to regain control.
Grant is not going to give up. He's going to stick and fight.
Lieutenant! Colonel Grant, sir.
Move your men to the left, Lieutenant. Do it now.
Yes, sir.
Super, super sad. Sad in the degree that brother turned against brother, father turns against son, son turns against father. People's ideals went blistery crazy during that time, and the only thing that they could see was red. Red as in blood. Blood of my enemy. The sad thing about it was they may have been attacking their enemy, but at the same time, they themselves was being attacked, which was weakening both forces. If the same occurrence took place today, our true adversary across the pond would sit idly by and let us destroy ourselves. And once we become so weakened, as I said before, a new alliance would come over and just basically walk in and take us over. All this bickering pertaining to this election, all these towns, people standing up, burning all these cities, burning all these towns, is all in the direction of the wrong direction towards a group of people that should sit down and work out their problems. Even to this morning, which is Saturday, I think the 19th, maybe the 20th. But even to this day, we have a body of people up in the Capitol that cannot get together towards what type of stimulus checks that they're going to pass out of the people that's been affected by this coronavirus, that are just allowing and letting things get even worse on a financial scale. And as people are losing their shirts here in America, while the conglomerates are still getting filthy rich, it only converts into a mixture of a perfect storm of starting once more a civil war in the United States. I personally believe that the Civil War was brought on because of how the European come over here and wanted to dictate, dominate the American Indian, and how that they slaughtered the American Indian, how that they genocide the American Indian. And because they had done this, just as the Bible teaches, what a man soweth that shall he also reap, because they sowed destruction, they received destruction in that generation of their ancestors that was so brutal, not only to the Native American, but also to the black man. They was basically eating bad karma that had come back to them in that period of time, because they or their ancestors participated in that same type of bloodshed. Now that same type of bloodshed was coming back at them. We have to understand the mind of our adversary. Once more, if our adversary can split us up, if our adversary can keep us fighting amongst each other, if our adversary can weaken us to the point that we become weakened as a strengthful body pertaining to a perfect union, if our adversary can do this, then he has basically won and taken us over. We must pull rank in unifying what we need to do in the year 2020, in knowing that our resources is limited and that we as a society over here in America have always been frowned upon and looked upon by certain groups as being their enemy because of our freedom. If we're going to maintain our freedom, we're going to have to unify, and we're going to have to understand the mind of our enemy. And the mind of our enemy can come back and haunt us just like it haunted these very people that was willing to sacrifice so much during the time that they sacrificed it. A lot of these people that was out there, matter of fact, most of these people that was out there doing what they was doing was considered cold-hearted militia. In regards to most of these people that was on the battlefield was either farmers, bankers, lawyers, people that didn't have nothing to do with any type of bloodshed in regard to an infantry unit that had to basically stop their whole lives in what that they was doing. It didn't matter if they was raising chickens or plowing the fields or fishing down by the Tennessee River. They basically had to stop their lives to engage in becoming a warrior, a soldier. Up until then, they had common lives. They was regular people. But now this cloud of darkness has fallen up onto them. It's kind of like if you look at history of what took place after the Spanish flu that devastated people's lives in 1918. 1918 devastated society over here in America. Shortly after 1918, you had the 1929 Depression, to where people was basically starving because they couldn't pay their taxes. When you obscure and steer away from God's anointing, when you leave the path that God intended for you to lead and for you to walk, then you go to walking in areas that Satan wants you to walk in. And this type of walk can bring destruction to a group of people so quickly, in the blink of a twinkling of an eye, it can be the ruin of us all.
Contrary to all my experience up to that time, we were on the defensive.
The endeavor of the enemy was simply to hurl their men against ours, with the disregard of losses on their own side.
Grant realized he needed to buy time, or his army was about to be overwhelmed.
Shiloh, the first day doesn't go well, but in the chaos, noise, the friction that we know is inherent in a battlefield, nobody gets it right initially. Nobody. Grant is able to learn through hard experience, and he has this vision of how it's going to turn out. In spite of all that's going bad around him,
Grant is already thinking to fall back gradually, holding successive lines of defense.
And looking at the map right here, I didn't realize that part of the Park of Shiloh does exceed all the way to the Tennessee River. I didn't know that. I knew it was close, but I didn't know that it actually went all the way to the banks of the Tennessee River. There's a part on the northern end that does engulf part of the banks of the Tennessee River.
Basically trading space for time to hold out until our reinforcements arrive.
And so orders went out to all his division commanders to hold their positions, as Grant put it, at all hazards.
What is it?
General Prentice surrendered. 2,000 soldiers.
Move the artillery to the high ground. Start the barrage at nightfall, have the Navy chip in from the river.
I'll telegraph Porter.
Grant on the battlefield does not appear to let the demons of failure enter. He's already been there. He's a fighter. That's one of the things he brought to any army he was in command of, was that sense of endurance, the sense that this isn't going to be easy. I'm not looking to win it in a day.
Grant has been falling back throughout the day, and the Confederate commander, Albert Sidney Johnston, wades into the battle himself because he's got to conquer or perish. And all of a sudden, Johnston is hit in the back of the leg, and he bleeds to death. He doesn't conquer, he perishes.
Johnston's second in command, Pierre Gustave Touton Beauregard, took over. And Beauregard believed they had the Union Army right where they wanted them. But Grant used the terrain extraordinarily well. His men constructed this defensive line along this deep ravine. The Confederates have to go down into this ravine. They make one charge up out of the ravine into this whirlwind of Union artillery and musket fire. They are driven back by this intense fire. Orders start to echo down the Confederate line that we're done, stop the attack. Beauregard, stop the fight. We'll finish this up in the morning. Grant, sitting on horseback watching as the Confederates fell back into the ravine, said, "Not beaten yet by a damn sight."
Grant, with his dogged determination, he thinks that nobody can beat him.
By the time darkness...
And, you know, to be a good commander, that's the type of morale that you have to take on